In 1971, baseball shattered tradition to elect a pitcher to its Hall of Fame who had won just 28 games while losing 31 in major league competition. His name was Leroy Satchel Paige, and he was the first to be honored principally because he had played in the era in which baseball was segregated. Unfortunately, in announcing his special election, an executive said Paige would not be a real Hall of Famer, and the sportscaster and former pitcher Jim Bouton observed that, just as in his playing days, they were only admitting Satchel Paige via the back door. Our number one story in the countdown, it's not that bad for the late Buck O'Neil, and he would be the first to scold us for the analogy, but the imagery is oddly recalled by a strange announcement from the board of directors of the Hall of Fame. It, says Hall Chairman Jane Forbes Clark in a statement issued last Thursday, has a very strong commitment to keeping Buck O'Neil's legacy alive forever, and at our last meeting in July, we began to look at ways to recognize his lasting contributions to our game. So O'Neil, who was bypassed for election in what was billed as the final vote on all of the greats of the old Negro Leagues, and who died on the 6th of this month, will be recognized by the Hall. But whether that means election or a different kind of plaque somewhere or a temporary exhibit, nobody knows. We'll ask one of his chroniclers and friends in just a moment. Saturday, in a private ceremony, Buck O'Neil was laid to rest in his hometown, Kansas City, Missouri. Later, at the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, 600 family and friends attended a public ceremony in which speakers such as former big leaguers Joe Morgan, Lou Brock, and Ernie Banks eulogized the man who helped pave the way for them and so many others. As promised, I'm joined now by Joe Posnanski, sports columnist of the Kansas City Star, author of the book The Soul of Baseball, A Road Trip Through Buck O'Neil's America, which will be released in February. Both of those titles probably should get second and third billing behind friend of Buck O'Neil. Joe, thanks for your time tonight.
It's great to be here.
What's this all about? This press release reads like they're announcing they have something to announce, but they haven't figured out quite what.
Yeah, you know, I thought it was, honestly, I thought it was pretty tacky to release a press release like that right before the memorial. They had nothing to announce other than to say that they would have something to announce at some point. I think there's a lot of guilt running through Cooperstown right now. A lot of people who feel badly that Buck was not elected and inducted while he was still alive. But right now, I don't think they know what they want to do. They just know that they need to do something.
I remember talking to Baseball Commissioner Bud Selig after that disastrous vote by the Special Negro Leagues Committee last February, and he said he hoped something could be changed in terms of an actual election. Whatever has been in the works, whatever is in the works now, did Buck know about it?
I don't think so. I think Buck, after he failed to get induction into the Hall of Fame in February, I think he put that behind him. Obviously he had to answer a lot of questions about it, and certainly there was some disappointment lingering, but I think he put it behind him. There were a lot of other people who were fighting, as I think people are now, to get a Buck O'Neil award, which I think would be really the nicest way and the best way to remember him. But I don't think Buck was involved at all, and the Hall of Fame certainly didn't keep him up on that.
Obviously, he cared about this, but is there any way to measure exactly how much? I mean, he seemed the least disappointed, as if I needed to tell you this, the least disappointed person in the whole process last winter. But then at the end of my last conversation with him, he said something that kind of led me to believe maybe some of this was trying to make the rest of us feel better. Let me replay that part and then get your reaction to it.
Sure.
The pleasure's all mine, and I thank you very much for having old Buck on here to talk a little. Thank you.
And by the way, I'm still going to push to get you in the Hall of Fame anyway.
Hey, don't stop. Keep it up.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Joe, how much did the issue of the Hall of Fame truly matter, do you think, to Buck?
You know, we talked about it a lot of times, and there's no question it disappointed him. There's no question he felt like he was going to go in. I think everybody had told him he was going in, and I was there the moment he was told that he didn't get enough votes, and there's no question there was disappointment there. But I've heard a lot of people say it broke his heart and it really brought him down, and I never saw that. Here was a guy that didn't get to go to high school because he was black. Here's a guy who didn't get to play in the major leagues, manage in the major leagues, was ignored for so many years. And he never let any of those things, which were much bigger, obviously, to him than the Hall of Fame. He just was not a guy who let bitterness linger inside him. And I know he was disappointed, but I really believe that his friends and people who love baseball were a lot more disappointed than he was.
Tell me about, as you so beautifully wrote, about the positive that he drew from not getting elected, what he learned about himself and the people around him.
You know, he called me a couple of days after the election and said that in a way it was a blessing for him to not get in because he found out how much people loved him. And I said to him that he was the only guy in the world that could think that way, and he admitted he probably was. He really was an amazing person, and I don't think at all that the Hall of Fame lingered with him.
Would he be more concerned, in fact, about what happens now to the entity for which he was the living embodiment, the Negro Leagues Museum?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Here in Kansas City, we're trying to build the Buck O'Neill Research and Education Center, which would bring the story of the Negro Leagues to children in schools, and that's all he was concerned about. It's a huge thing. It's going to cost $15 million, all privately raised, and that was, without a doubt, he saw that as his legacy and not the Hall of Fame.
And Saturday's public ceremony for him, give me one image to take out of that in about a minute.
You know, it was a beautiful ceremony, and there was a lot of joy just the way Buck would want it. And I don't like saying this, but the image that probably sticks with me was Joe Morgan up on the stage breaking down, thinking about Buck not getting into the Hall of Fame. And you know, it wasn't the way I wanted to remember it, but it definitely stood out.
Well, I think it's fair to say it was the Hall of Fame's loss, and certainly not his. And that, you know, I don't know how many people we can say this about, that we were lucky to be in the on the planet at the same time as Buck O'Neill.
There's no doubt about it.
Joe Posnanski, who has a book coming up in February on Buck O'Neill, and we're looking forward greatly to that. And we'll do it in the right order on the way out. Friend of the late Buck O'Neill first, sports columnist of the Kansas City Star also.
That's the way.
Joe, great thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right.